Tonight, we drift to the Bay of Naples, where soft water touches stone and the first pale light gathers beneath Mount Vesuvius. In this quiet hour, Herculaneum still sleeps in peace, so settle in, get comfortable, and let the day slowly fall away as we enter a world not yet touched by ash, fear, or history. Breathe gently now and follow the shore as dawn begins its patient rise over the calm sea. Told History offers calm, true stories from the past, shared slowly to help you rest while real places and forgotten lives return in careful detail. If you enjoy these peaceful journeys through history, please like and subscribe to support the channel. And now, with the sea still murmuring nearby, let us step softly into Herculaneum, where another quiet morning is just beginning beneath the mountain. Chapter 1. The Quiet Shore Before Dawn. Along the Bay of Naples, Herculaneum rested like a polished jewel beside the water, smaller than nearby Pompeii, yet elegant in its own reserved way. Villas looked toward the sea, their walls catching the earliest light, while narrow streets remained hushed. Above it all stood Vesuvius, familiar and unmoving, part of the horizon so ordinary that few gave its peaceful summit much thought. Before sunrise fully arrived, the town belonged to gentle sounds. Water folding against the shore, a distant creak from moored boats, the faint stir of morning within shuttered homes. Stone steps, worn smooth by years of passing feet, held the coolness of night. The air carried a trace of salt and garden earth, and everything seemed arranged in a quiet balance, as if the world itself had chosen to pause here. Herculaneum had long enjoyed a favored place on this coast. Roman writers knew the region for its beauty, mild climate, and fertile land, and wealthy families built homes here to escape the noise of the larger city. Terraces opened toward bright water, columns framed sea views, painted rooms sheltered conversation, reading, and rest. In the stillness before dawn, all that comfort lay hidden behind doors, waiting for the day to begin. The streets of Herculaneum rose and fell with the natural shape of the land, a reminder that this town was built between mountain and sea. Here, daily life moved through compact lanes, over stone paving, and past fountains fed by Roman engineering. Yet in these early moments, the public spaces were empty. No market noise filled the air, no footsteps hurried by. Only waiting lights slowly revealed the patient geometry of the town. If you had stood near the waterfront then, you might have seen fishing boats resting in quiet rows, their shapes dark against the silver water. Beyond them, the bay opened wide and serene. The sea, so often praised by Roman poets, reflected the sky in soft bands of blue and pearl. Nothing in that peaceful surface suggested danger. Nothing hinted that this familiar coast would soon become a place remembered for sudden ruin. As dawn strengthened, the villas nearest the shore began to emerge more clearly. Balconies, courtyards, garden walls, and shaded porticos designed for leisure and display. Herculaneum was no rough frontier settlement. It was a cultivated town where comfort and taste mattered. Mosaics lay beneath sandals. Bronze lamps waited to be lit again at evening. In these homes, books were read, meals were shared, and routines repeated with the easy confidence of stability. Somewhere inside those houses, servants may already have begun their first tasks, moving quietly before their masters woke. A lamp might have been trimmed, water might have been carried. Bread ovens perhaps held the memory of yesterday's heat. We cannot know each small movement of that morning, yet the rhythm of Roman domestic life helps us imagine it. Ordered, practical, and familiar, shaped by habit more than thought in the fading dark. The mountain above them did not seem like a threat. Vesuvius was simply there, part of the landscape, its slopes tied to vineyards and farms. In the 1st century AD, many people living around the bay did not understand volcanoes as we do now. Even after an earthquake struck the region in AD 62, rebuilding continued. Life resumed. Walls were repaired, houses were restored. Confidence returned, quiet and unquestioned, beneath the same mountain. That confidence shaped the feeling of the town. Herculaneum was not waiting for disaster. It was expecting another ordinary day. Merchants would open shops, neighbors would meet in passing, children would move through courtyards and lanes, bathhouses would warm with steam and conversation, the sea would brighten under the sun. To those who lived there, history had not yet chosen this place. It was simply home, comfortable, lived in, and deeply known. There is something especially moving in that unnoticed calm. We, looking back across centuries, know what the people of Herculaneum could not know. Yet for now, it is enough to remain with them in this gentle hour, before the sky changes and before the mountain speaks. To linger here is to feel the fragile softness of ordinary life, the kind of peace that seems permanent precisely because nobody imagines it can end. Morning light now touched the stone more warmly, bringing out shades of gold, cream, and faded red in the walls. Wooden beams in upper rooms caught brightness first, while lower alleys still held shadows. The town awakened by degrees, not all at once. Here and there a window opened. Somewhere, a door bar lifted. The day entered quietly, as though Herculaneum wished to remain half asleep a little longer beside the breathing sea. Beneath that calm surface, Herculaneum carried layers of history already old in AD 79. The town had roots before Roman rule, shaped over time by local Italic peoples and later absorbed into Rome's wider world. By the early empire, it had become thoroughly Roman in public life and architecture, yet still closely tied to the land and coast around it. Its identity was refined, prosperous, and inseparable from the bay's soft brilliance. Public buildings stood among private houses with an ease that reflected Roman urban life. Baths, shops, shrines, and meeting places were woven into the same compact fabric as family homes. Nothing here needed grand distances. The town could be crossed on foot, and daily life unfolded close at hand. In this way, Herculaneum felt intimate. It was a place where the ordinary and the beautiful sat side by side without any need to announce themselves. Gardens, too, softened the town. Courtyards planted with greenery cooled the air and offered retreat from summer heat. Pots, fountains, and shaded corners brought a sense of inward calm, even within busy households. In a seaside town like this, the natural world was never far away. Salt on the breeze, light on leaves, distant gulls over the bay. Everything invited a slower pace, a lingering glance, a quieter breath at morning. It is easy to imagine one particular household waking now, someone drawing back a curtain, someone listening for movement in the street, someone pausing before the day begins in earnest. Such moments rarely enter the historical record, yet they form the true texture of the past. Empires are remembered through wars and rulers, but towns like Herculaneum lived through smaller things. Breakfast, errands, conversation, work, and the comforting repetition. The shoreline itself shaped local life in subtle ways. Goods arrived by sea, visitors came for pleasure, ideas, fashions, and luxuries moved along these waters with merchants and travelers. Herculaneum was not isolated. It belonged to a vibrant Roman coast where wealth and culture gathered easily. Yet in the hush before full day, none of that movement was visible. The bay seemed to hold its breath, resting under a sky of widening light. In later centuries, the buried town would become a place of astonishing preservation, but that future was unimaginable now. Wooden objects, food, walls, even written texts would survive because of the catastrophe ahead. For the moment, though, nothing was ancient. Nothing was archaeological. Everything was simply present. A cup on a table, a latch on a door, a sandal by a threshold, all still belonging to the living world. Perhaps that is why this hour feels so tender. We meet Herculaneum not at its end, but in its wholeness. The town is complete. Its harbor, homes, and streets still function as they were meant to. Its people have names, duties, preferences, worries, and plans for the afternoon. The mountain has not interrupted them yet. Dawn continues to unfold with extraordinary gentleness, and the sea goes on touching the shore without urgency. Even Vesuvius, seen in this light, could appear almost protected, rising broad and quiet above the settlements below. Mountains often gather meaning in the lives around them. They become landmarks, companions, measures of distance and weather. So it must have seemed here. The people of the bay had learned to live in its presence, to read its slopes as familiar scenery. Nothing in this peaceful morning demanded fear from those who looked up. As the sun climbed, colors sharpened across rooftops and plastered walls. The first true warmth entered the air. Soon the sounds of work and commerce would begin, and the spell of pre-dawn stillness would pass. Yet there is value in remaining here for one more quiet moment, in noticing how history often stands nearest not in noise, but in silence, just before lives move forward into events they cannot foresee. This is where our journey begins, not with ash, but with peace, not with loss, but with a town fully alive beside one of the most beautiful bays in the Roman world. To understand what Herculaneum would become, we first need to feel what it was. Sheltered rooms, cool stone, sea air, morning light, and the deep human trust that tomorrow will resemble today in all the ways that matter. So let the image settle gently in your mind. A quiet shore before dawn, elegant houses above the water, and a sleeping town beneath a mountain no one truly fears. Herculaneum rests in balance between land and sea, memory and ordinary life. For a little longer, all is calm. For a little longer, the world remains unchanged, and in that stillness, we wait together for the story to continue. Chapter 2: Courtyards, Frescoes, and Seaside Rooms. In Herculaneum, daily life moved with a quieter rhythm than the grand legends of Rome might suggest. Beyond the streets, homes opened inward to cool courtyards where light touched stone, water, and leaves. Here, the town revealed its gentler nature, not an arena of spectacle, but a place shaped by comfort, habit, and the steady pleasures of ordinary days beside the sea. Chapter 2: Courtyards, Frescoes, and Seaside Rooms. Many houses were arranged around an atrium or small court, spaces that gathered air and daylight into the center of domestic life. Rainwater might fall into a shallow basin below, then be stored for household use. Around these open spaces, family members, visitors, and servants passed softly through the day, sheltered from the stronger heat beyond the doorway and street. Chapter 2: Courtyards, Frescoes, and Seaside Rooms. The walls themselves carried color. Frescoes in red, black, yellow, and soft white framed doorways, gardens, columns, and imagined landscapes. Even modest rooms could hold careful decoration, offering scenes that widened the eye and calmed the mind. Painted architecture created the feeling of depth where little existed, as though each room wished to open gently beyond itself into another, quieter world. Chapter 2: Courtyards, Frescoes, and Seaside Rooms. In these interiors, beauty was not reserved only for the wealthy, though the finest houses certainly displayed it with confidence. Decorative floors, small marble details, and polished surfaces reflected a culture that valued order and grace in everyday surroundings. To step inside was to leave behind the plain brightness of the road and enter a world arranged for shade, conversation, rest, and... Chapter 2: Courtyards, Frescoes, and Seaside Rooms. Near the heart of many homes stood the household shrine, or lararium, where families honored protective spirits and ancestral memories. These shrines could be simple or ornate, yet each marked a quiet meeting place between daily life and devotion. A small offering, a whispered prayer, the passing notice of a hand. Such gestures tied the ordinary tasks of the home to a larger sacred order. Chapter 2: Courtyards, Frescoes, and Seaside Rooms. Kitchens were often compact, practical spaces, marked by hearths blackened from repeated cooking. Bread, olives, fish, fruit, beans, and wine formed part of the household table, while imported flavors hinted at wider trade across the Mediterranean. Meals varied by wealth, of course, but even simple food connected Herculaneum to sea, countryside, and empire. Each ingredient arriving through labor, Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. Bedrooms were usually smaller and darker, places of retreat rather than display. Storage chests, wooden furniture, lamps, and textiles gave warmth to these enclosed rooms, though much has vanished with time. What remains still suggests intimacy, the folded pattern of domestic life, where sleep, dressing, and private conversation unfolded away from the courtyard. In such rooms, the great machine. Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. Some homes included upper stories or balconies, adding another layer to the town's compact design. From these elevated spaces, residents may have looked across tiled roofs, narrow lanes, and glimpses of the bay. Sound would drift upward, footsteps, distant trade, a passing voice, the muted work of morning. Yet compared with larger cities, Herculaneum still seems to have offered a more intimate and gentle. Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. Shops and workshops were woven into the fabric of the town, often attached directly to homes. Here, commerce did not always stand apart from family life. A doorway could lead from the street into a room of business, then farther inward toward the private household. Bakers, cloth workers, tavern keepers, and artisans helped sustain the town's daily rhythm, their labor grounding its elegance in practice. Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. The baths offered another center of ordinary life. Romans across the empire valued bathing not only for cleanliness but for routine, sociability, and comfort. In Herculaneum, bath complexes included changing rooms, warm chambers, and hot bathing spaces, all carefully engineered. Water, heat, and architecture worked together with quiet sophistication, guiding the body through a sequence designed to. Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. Within the baths, decoration softened utility. Mosaics underfoot, painted surfaces, and carved details could transform a functional space into one of pleasure. Visitors moved from cooler rooms to warmer ones, accompanied by conversation, steam, and the gentle echo of footsteps on stone. Even here, amid public routine, Herculaneum expressed refinement, not through excess alone, but through care. Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. Water shaped the identity of the town in quieter ways as well. Fountains refreshed courtyards, basins collected rain, and bathing culture reinforced the value of flowing, managed water in civic life. Its presence signaled both engineering skill and social expectation. To hear water in a shaded house or public room would have been ordinary, yet it also carried the subtle music of stability. Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. In wealthier residences near the ancient shoreline, rooms opened toward the sea breeze. These villas were designed to receive light and air, framing views that connected private comfort with the wider beauty of the bay. Colonnades, terraces, and broad windows made the landscape part of domestic life. The horizon itself became a companion, shifting in color, reflecting weather, and reminding. Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. The villa of the Papyri, though exceptional in scale, belonged to this same culture of cultivated leisure. Its long peristyles, gardens, sculptures, and seaside setting reveal a world where study, rest, and display could exist together. It was not merely a shelter, but an environment shaped for thought and pleasure. In such places, architecture became a quiet partner to reading, walking, dining. Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. Yet Herculaneum was not composed only of grand homes. Smaller dwellings, rented spaces, work areas, and shared urban corners also formed the town's texture. Their details survive less completely, but they remind us that Roman comfort existed in many degrees. The grace of the place did not depend solely on luxury. It lived also in routine patterns, opening shutters, sweeping floors, preparing. Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. The streets outside could be narrow, but they linked the community closely together. Stone thresholds, stepping surfaces, and worn passageways suggest countless small journeys made each day. Someone carrying goods from market, someone visiting the baths, someone returning from the shore, all moved within a town scaled to human pace. Herculaneum was connected to the empire, certainly, Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. Light changed everything. Morning illumination entered from above into atria and courts, tracing columns and splashing against painted plaster. By afternoon, shadows lengthened and interiors grew cooler, preserving a sense of calm retreat. Lamps would later gather the evening into smaller circles of warmth. This daily movement of brightness and dimness shaped domestic feeling. Time was not only Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. Smell, too, would have defined the town in ways archaeology can only partly recover. Bread baking, oil warming, sea air drifting inland, damp stone after water, traces of smoke, herbs, and wine, all mingled in the fabric of daily life. These were not grand historical events, yet they formed the real atmosphere of Herculaneum. History often survives in monuments, but living is made from smaller. Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. Sound in Herculaneum may have been gentler than in a larger commercial center like Pompeii, though it was never silent. Sandaled steps, courtyard birds, distant conversation, the splash of water, a vendor's call, kitchen tools against pottery. Each noise rose and faded within stone rooms and narrow lanes. Together they created a modest urban music, one balanced between activity and repose. Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. Children would have learned the town through repeated paths, across thresholds, around columns, into workshops, toward shrines, under the watch of elders and servants. For them, painted walls and polished floors were not remarkable artifacts, but part of the ordinary world. This is one of history's quietest truths. What later ages admire behind glass was once touched casually by hands. Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. Evening likely softened the town into a slower stillness. Doors closed, lamps were trimmed, meals were shared, and the heat of day began to ease. In houses facing the shore, the sea air may have moved through open rooms before night settled fully. Such moments are difficult to recover in exact detail, yet they feel close, because rest, relief, and familiar shelter remain among the oldest human experiences. Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. What makes Herculaneum so moving is not only what was lost, but how vividly ordinary life still lingers there. We sense not abstract Romans, but households. People arranging cups, tending shrines, managing accounts, bathing, reading, preparing rooms for guests. The town survives in this domestic register with unusual tenderness. A place where civilization appears not as conquest, but as the Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. To wander through these remains in the imagination is to encounter Rome at its most intimate. Not senators in debate, nor armies on campaign, but walls painted for pleasure, rooms open for breeze, and water guided for comfort. Herculaneum invites a slower understanding of antiquity, one measured less by headlines of empire and more by the patient artistry of people making homes beside a loom. Chapter 2. Courtyards, frescoes, and seaside rooms. And so this chapter lingers among interiors, thresholds, baths, and sea-facing villas, where Roman life appears unexpectedly gentle. Before catastrophe and ash, there was shade, color, routine, and the quiet confidence of a prosperous town. To remember Herculaneum in this way is important. First as a living place, filled with ordinary grace, before history turned it into a site of silence. Chapter 3. The Villa by the Water. Beyond Herculaneum's busy streets, the shore opened into a grand private world now called the Villa of the Papyri. Set near the sea, the residence likely belonged to one of Rome's wealthiest circles. Long terraces looked toward the Bay of Naples, where light moved softly across the water. Here, comfort and status were carefully arranged beside quiet spaces meant for conversation, study, and slow reflection. Chapter 3. The Villa by the Water. Visitors approaching the estate would have found not a simple house, but a sprawling complex shaped by taste, ambition, and leisure. Colonnades stretched in measured lines, offering shade from the southern sun. Gardens breathed between stone walkways. Pools gathered the sky into still blue mirrors. Everything encouraged an unhurried pace, as though the villa itself wished to soften the mind before leading it deeper. In Chapter 3, the villa by the water. Roman villas along this coast were designed to join nature and architecture into a single experience. At Herculaneum, that meeting seems especially rich. Sea air drifted through open spaces. Sunlight touched polished floors and pale walls. A person could move from garden to portico, from portico to chamber, without losing the sense of water nearby. The boundary between cultivated beauty and the wider landscape. Chapter 3, the villa by the water. The villa extended over a large area, far greater than an ordinary townhouse, suggesting a retreat built for display as much as comfort. Scholars have long connected it with the Piso family, an aristocratic Roman household, though many details remain debated. What is clearer is the atmosphere it once held, wealth expressed through space, symmetry, and materials, yet also through the quieter privilege of Chapter 3, the villa by the water. Imagine walking beneath a covered colonnade, your steps slowed by the rhythm of columns rising one after another. Beyond them, planted courts offered order and fragrance. The Romans valued such arrangements not only for beauty, but for balance. A well-shaped villa could soothe the spirit. It could frame a view, cool the air, and guide the body through moments of brightness and shade, movement and pause, openness. Chapter 3, the villa by the water. Water played its own gentle part in this setting. Pools and channels reflected columns, leaves, and passing clouds. The faint sound of splashing would have mingled with footsteps, voices, and distant waves. In Roman design, water often carried more than practical value. It signaled refinement. It animated stillness. At this villa, it likely deepened the feeling that nature itself had been invited inward. Chapter 3, the villa by the water. Among the villa's most famous treasures were its bronzes and marbles, found centuries later beneath hardened volcanic deposits. These sculptures once stood along walkways and in garden spaces, quietly shaping the experience of those who passed. Some captured runners, thinkers, gods, or noble figures. Together they suggest a household attentive to Greek artistic traditions. Art here was not tucked away. Chapter 3, the villa by the water. To own such works was to declare education as well as power. Roman elites often admired Greek literature, philosophy, and sculpture, collecting them as signs of cultivated identity. The villa by the water seems to have embraced that ideal fully. It was a place where status could be seen in bronze and stone, but also in conversation, memory, and learning. Wealth was impressive, yet knowledge made wealth appear mean. Chapter 3, the villa by the water. One can picture sheltered rooms opening off the porticos, each with its own purpose. Some spaces welcomed guests, others offered privacy. Some may have held couches for dining, while quieter chambers invited reading or dictation. In wealthy Roman life, a residence was also a stage for social ritual. Yet within such ceremony, there remained intervals of retreat, moments when the sea beyond the walls. Chapter 3, the villa by the water. Reading in the Roman world was often not silent in the modern sense. Texts might be spoken aloud, shared with companions, or read by enslaved attendants to their owners. In a villa like this, thought was social as well as solitary. A scroll could begin in private study and continue in discussion under a colonnade. Ideas moved through rooms as freely as sea breeze, carried by voices softened by distance and Chapter 3, the villa by the water. Philosophy seems especially close to the atmosphere of this house. The library discovered here was largely connected with Epicurean thought, a school concerned with tranquility, friendship, and freedom from fear. That does not mean every moment in the villa was devoted to calm wisdom. It remained a wealthy Roman residence. Still, its surviving texts suggest that reflection mattered here, and that intellect. Chapter 3, the villa by the water. In the 1st century AD, a house like this stood at the meeting point of empire and intimacy. Its owner could be linked, however indirectly, to the political life of Rome, yet daily experience unfolded through ordinary textures. Shaded walks, prepared meals, careful letters, conversations after bathing, and glances toward the glittering bay. Great systems of power often leave grand monuments. But sometimes, Chapter 3, the villa by the water. The villa's scale hints that it was more than a seasonal shelter. It was a statement placed on the coast, where architecture framed both sea and self. To look outward from its terraces was to enjoy a world shaped by peace, labor, and privilege. To look inward was to enter a cultivated universe of books, artworks, and arranged gardens. The two views, outward to nature, inward to thought, seem central to its identity. Chapter 3. The Villa by the Water. Archaeology has recovered only part of this story. Tunnels cut through volcanic layers in the 18th century revealed remarkable finds, but also disturbed the original arrangement. Even so, enough remains to suggest the villa's extraordinary richness. Long before anyone could read its carbonized scrolls, the building itself spoke clearly. Its design announced ambition, its objects announced taste. And Chapter 3, the Villa by the Water. The rooms that once housed scrolls may not have seemed dramatic to their ancient owners. A library could be woven gently into domestic life, as natural to the villa as a dining room or garden court. Yet in hindsight, those shelves became the most astonishing feature of all. Across the Greco-Roman world, countless texts vanished. Here, by cruel chance and strange preservation, one collection endured. Chapter 3, the Villa by the Water. Before that terrible day in AD 79, the scrolls were ordinary objects of care and use. Rolled papyrus rested in storage, waiting for hands to lift it open. Titles might be recognized by small tags. Some works were copied, others studied, others set aside for later. It is moving to imagine this routine, because disaster so often erases the ordinary first. What survived here survived not because it was safe. Chapter 3. The Villa by the Water. The library discovered at the villa remains the only substantial library to survive from the ancient Greco-Roman world. That fact gives the place a special stillness in the historical imagination. It was once only one house among many elegant residences. Now it stands alone as a keeper of voices nearly extinguished. Its corridors and gardens matter not only for their beauty, but for what they sheltered without. Chapter 3. The Villa by the Water. Some scholars believe the collection may reflect the interests of Philodemus, an Epicurean philosopher associated with the Piso circle. His works appear among the texts recovered from the villa. If so, these rooms may once have held not just admired books, but an active intellectual community. The thought is gentle and vivid, conversations unfolding near the sea, manuscripts copied or discussed, and Chapter 3. The Villa by the Water. Yet even without attaching every room to a known name, the villa invites us to imagine how learning looked when it belonged to domestic space. Knowledge was not sealed away in an institution. It sat beside gardens and sleeping chambers, near baths, meals, and household noise. A person might leave a discussion of ethics, and then step immediately into sunlit air. The life of the mind remained embedded in the rhythm. Chapter 3. The Villa by the Water. There is something quietly haunting in that nearness. The same spaces that held ease and contemplation also stood within reach of Vesuvius. On clear days, the mountain may have seemed merely part of the horizon, familiar and harmless. The villa's residents could admire the sea, the sculptures, the ordered plants, and never suspect how soon heat, ash, and pressure would seal their world. Serenity and catastrophe. Chapter 3. The Villa by the Water. For now, though, we remain in the villa before destruction, before tunnels, museums, and scanning technology, before the blackened scrolls became objects of global wonder. We stay with the house in its living form, where sandals cross cool floors and afternoon light lingers beneath the colonnade. This pause matters. To understand the library's later fame, we must first feel the quiet, ordinary elegance of the place. Chapter 3. The Villa by the Water. In that elegance, wealth and learning did not compete. They reinforced one another. Fine art suggested education. Spacious architecture created leisure. Leisure allowed study. Study, in turn, gave depth to luxury, turning display into identity. The villa seems to embody this Roman ideal with unusual clarity. It was not only a beautiful residence by the sea, it was a setting where cultivated life could be performed. Chapter 3. The villa by the water. Soon, this residence would become something else in our story. A buried archive, a puzzle for excavators, and a fragile bridge to lost literature. But at this point in time, it remains warm with presence. Its gardens are tended, its bronzes stand intact, its scrolls are still readable by lamplight. The future has not yet closed around them. Everything valuable is still simply part of the household, resting quiet. Chapter 3. The villa by the water. So we leave this chapter with a final image of the bay, the terraces, and the rooms beyond them, where thought once shared space with comfort and art. The villa of the Papyri was grand, yes, but its deepest importance lay hidden in fragile rolls of papyrus. Within that calm house by the water slept a legacy no one could yet measure. The silent library of Herculaneum waiting for another age. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the afternoon light. In the warm stillness of the villa, the library comes gently into view. Shelves or cupboards holding papyrus rolls, each one light in the hand and vulnerable to time. Afternoon brightness drifts across the room in softened bands. Somewhere nearby, the sea breathes against the shore, while within these walls, thought itself seems to rest quietly, waiting for the next attentive reader to return. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the afternoon light. We cannot know the exact arrangement of every room or every text, yet the surviving evidence invites careful imagination. In houses of the Roman elite, books were precious objects as well as vessels of learning. A scroll could carry poetry, philosophy, history, or private notes, all copied by hand, all dependent on fragile fibers pressed from papyrus and tied to the patience of readers and scribes. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the afternoon light. A Roman library was not silent in the modern sense. Reading was often a spoken act, with words murmured softly as the roll moved from one hand to the other. The reader unwound one side and gathered the finished portion in the other, advancing line by line. Each movement was measured and intimate, a slow physical conversation between memory, voice, and the written page. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the afternoon light. In such a room, knowledge did not stand upright in rows of bound volumes. It rested curled within cylinders, labeled with small tags so their contents could be found again. To seek a text was to search among these rolled forms, each one almost modest in appearance. The greatest arguments about nature, ethics, and the gods might sleep inside something no larger than a person's forearm. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the afternoon light. Scholars believe many of the works found at the villa of the Papyri are linked to Epicurean philosophy, including writings associated with Philodemus, an Epicurean thinker of the 1st century BC. This suggests a household engaged not only with luxury but with ideas. The library was more than decoration. It may have been a lived intellectual space, where calm reflection shaped the rhythm of cultivated. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the afternoon light. Imagine a reader pausing in the softened heat of late afternoon, perhaps after the midday meal, perhaps before the evening breeze gathers. A slave trained in letters might assist, retrieving a requested roll, holding place, or making copies. The social world around books was layered and hewn. Learning depended not only on authors, but on hands that stored, carried, copied, and protected their words. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the afternoon light. The texts themselves were vulnerable from the beginning. Papyrus was practical, widespread, and remarkably durable in dry, favorable conditions. Yet it remained an organic material. Reed transformed into sheets, then into a surface for ink. Moisture could stain it. Handling could wear it thin. Fire could erase it in moments. Every library of the ancient world stood in quiet negotiation with decay. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the afternoon light. This fragility gives ancient reading a special tenderness. Each surviving text has crossed an improbable distance. Before any disaster arrived, before ash and heat altered everything, these rolls already lived close to loss. They depended on renewal through copying, because no single manuscript was expected to last forever. To preserve a work was not merely to own it was to keep rewriting it. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. In the villa, philosophy may have offered a fitting companion to the landscape outside. Epicurean thought, in broad terms, urged freedom from unnecessary fear and careful attention to the nature of things. One can imagine such works being read in shaded comfort, where cultivated gardens met sea air. The setting itself seems almost designed for contemplation. Beauty, order, and inquiry arranged with. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. Yet a library is always a map of choices. Which works were collected, which were copied again, which were left aside. These decisions shaped what later generations might know. Ancient literature has reached us unevenly, with whole traditions surviving by chance and others fading into silence. Even in times of peace, memory was selected. Shelves were not only storage, they were quiet instruments. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. The villa's readers may have unrolled discussions of ethics, pleasure, rhetoric, music, or the proper way to understand the natural world. They may have revisited favorite passages or compared one teacher with another. We cannot place every voice in every room, but we can sense the atmosphere of repeated return. A library is not just where books are kept, it is where minds learn how to dwell with them. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. Outside, Herculaneum carried on with its ordinary grace. Boats moved along the coast. Light shifted across walls and colonnades. Meals were prepared, letters sent, business discussed. Inside the library, another kind of activity unfolded. Slower, quieter, harder to see. A sentence absorbed in stillness leaves no footprint, yet such moments can shape a life. The most delicate acts of civilization are often the least. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. Perhaps that is why the image of these rolls moves us so deeply now. They represent not triumph or conquest, but attention. Someone cared enough to gather them, house them, and keep them near. Someone expected tomorrow to resemble today closely enough that a text set aside in afternoon light could be opened again. The library rested on confidence and continuity, a faith so ordinary it hardly needed naming. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. Roman elite culture valued literary education, but its libraries were not identical to public institutions in later ages. A private collection reflected wealth, taste, networks, and philosophical sympathy. Books could travel through trade, patronage, and copying circles, making each collection partly local and partly connected to the wider Mediterranean world. In one room by the Bay of Naples, Chapter 4, Scrolls in the Afternoon Light, there is also a simple material beauty to imagine: the pale surface of papyrus, the dark flow of ink, the smooth rounded shape of a stored roll, the little tag that hinted at the text within. None of it was grand in the manner of marble. Its beauty was quieter, closer to touch than spectacle. Knowledge often arrives in humble forms, asking only light, time, and a willing hand. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. If the villa belonged, as many historians think, to the circle of Lucius Calpurnius Piso's Caesars and Linus, then the library also reminds us how politics and philosophy could exist side by side in Roman life. Public power and private study were not separate worlds. A statesman might move between debate and reading, between civic obligation and reflective retreat, carrying the tensions of the Republic and Empire. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. Still, it is best to move carefully here. The library does not reveal every thought of its owners, and archaeology gives us fragments more often than certainties. What survives allows us to glimpse patterns, not complete biographies. Yet fragments can be eloquent. A charred roll, once ordinary and perishable, now speaks of reading habits, intellectual allegiance, and the astonishing vulnerability of all. Chapter 4. Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. Think of the labor hidden in each text. Before printing, every work passed through human effort again and again. Composition, dictation, copying, correction, storage. Errors entered, margins gathered notes, fibers split, ink faded. A book was never entirely finished, only handed onward. The library, then, was not a static archive, but a breathing chain of transmission, a place where preservation depended. Chapter 4, Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. And so the room becomes a meditation on memory itself. Human beings have always tried to place thought somewhere outside the mind, on stone, clay, parchment, paper, screen. Papyrus was one answer, elegant and vulnerable. It held language long enough for another person to receive it if fortune allowed. Between writer and reader stretched a bridge made of plant fibers, ink, and trust in an unseen future. Chapter 4, Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. Before catastrophe, there was routine. That may be the gentlest and saddest truth here. The rolls were not waiting to become treasures. They were waiting to be used, consulted, discussed, copied, perhaps set aside until morning. In their own day, they belonged to the ordinary life of an extraordinary house. Only later would history surround them with awe. At first, they were simply books in their proper place. Chapter 4, Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. Afternoon light continues to move across the imagined room, climbing a wall, touching a wooden case, fading from one corner and gathering in another. Time feels slow enough to hear. Nothing announces danger, nothing warns the reader to stop. That stillness is part of what makes the library unforgettable, the sense that knowledge sat peacefully in its shelter, unaware of how near destruction had already. Chapter 4, Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. Across the ancient Mediterranean, countless libraries vanished through neglect, war, damp, fire, and simple disuse. Most left almost no trace. The Herculaneum rolls are precious, partly because they survived in altered form where so much else disappeared entirely. Their existence reminds us that the literary world of antiquity was always larger than what remains. For every recovered fragment, many more. Chapter 4, Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. Yet even this awareness of loss can feel strangely peaceful. It asks us to value what is partial, to listen closely to what endures, and to accept that history often reaches us in softened outlines. The library does not return whole. It returns as presence, absence, and possibility together. Enough to stir the mind, enough to quiet it, enough to let us sit beside vanished readers for a while. Chapter 4, Scrolls in the Afternoon Light. For one suspended moment, before ash, before heat, before the mountain changed the coast forever, the written world of the villa rests complete within itself. Scrolls wait in order. Readers breathe in the shade. Philosophical words remain folded in silence. Memory has taken material form, delicate and temporary, and because it is delicate, it feels profoundly human. We linger here a little longer. Chapter 5, When Vesuvius Broke the Sky. By late August in AD 79, ordinary routines still moved through Herculaneum. The sea lay nearby, villas looked toward the bay, and daily life continued beneath a mountain most people did not yet fear. Then the deep order of the world began to shift. A rising column of ash climbed into the air, and the familiar horizon started to change before human understanding could catch up. Chapter 5, When Vesuvius Broke the Sky. Across the region, people looked upward and saw a strange cloud building over Vesuvius. Pliny the Younger, watching from a distance, later described it as resembling a pine tree, rising tall before spreading outward. For those living closer, the sight was not poetic but unsettling. The mountain seemed to open itself into the sky, sending stone, ash, and burning fragments into the daylight above Campania. Chapter 5, When Vesuvius Broke the Sky. In Pompeii, pumice began to fall for hours, but Herculaneum first faced a different pattern. Winds early in the eruption carried much of the falling material away from the town. That brief difference may have created a fragile sense of distance, as if danger were near but not descending directly upon its streets. The bay still existed, the houses still stood, and uncertainty moved faster than clear. Chapter 5, When Vesuvius Broke the Sky. Yet eruptions do not remain fixed in one form. As the volcanic column became unstable, it began to collapse, generating surges of searing gas, ash, and fragmented rock. These pyroclastic flows moved with devastating speed. In the hours after midnight and toward morning, they rushed toward Herculaneum. What had seemed briefly spared was suddenly overtaken by a force beyond ordinary experience, beyond escape. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky, the shoreline became a place of last decisions. Archaeological evidence shows that many people gathered in vaulted waterfront chambers, perhaps hoping to wait out the danger or find rescue by sea. They carried the instincts of ordinary life into an extraordinary catastrophe: shelter, family, valuables, proximity to the boats. But the heat that arrived with the surges was overwhelming, immediate. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky. The first surges that entered Herculaneum were intensely hot. Modern study suggests temperatures high enough to carbonize wood and preserve organic materials in altered form. Doors, beams, furniture, and foodstuffs were transformed by the violent conditions. The town was not simply covered in gentle layers. It was struck by repeated currents of ash and gas that filled spaces rapidly. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky, darkness followed with a weight of its own. It was not the quiet darkness of evening settling over water, nor the soft dimming of lamps after supper. This was a darkness made of matter, ash in the air, heat in the lungs, and a sky no longer recognizable. Sound, too, must have changed. The sea, the streets, the household voices of the town were replaced by collapse, impact, and rushing force. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky. Inside the houses of Herculaneum, elegant rooms met the eruption without ceremony. Painted walls, polished surfaces, shelves, fabrics, and domestic shrines were left in place as the surges entered. Spaces once arranged for conversation, meals, reading, and rest became sealed chambers of volcanic debris. The grace of Roman interior life did not vanish all at once. It was interrupted, then buried, held in suspension. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky. The town itself stood on a slope above the ancient shoreline, and the eruption would ultimately extend that shoreline outward with packed volcanic material. Buildings near the coast were engulfed. Streets disappeared beneath deposits that later hardened into deep layers. Herculaneum became enclosed within the aftermath, not merely dusted over but entombed. The geography people had known: harbor, road, threshold. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky. To imagine this moment calmly is not to diminish it. Calmness allows the scale to be felt without distortion. The eruption was not a single burst, but a sequence of phases, each reshaping what remained. Ash cloud became collapsing column. Falling debris gave way to surging currents. Visibility gave way to blindness. The disaster unfolded in stages, and each stage narrowed the world of Herculaneum. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky. Somewhere in the town, lamps may still have stood where they were last set down. Cups may have rested on tables. Doors may have remained half open. These small, unfinished gestures are part of what makes Herculaneum feel so near. The eruption did not erase the human scale before preserving it. Instead, it stopped ordinary motion in place, fixing evidence of routine against the arrival of something vast. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky. The heat was among the most terrible aspects of the event. Researchers studying victims and building remains have emphasized that thermal shock played a major role in the destruction near the waterfront. This was not only burial under cold ash, it was exposure to violently hot surges carrying volcanic particles and gases. In such conditions, the body had little defense, and the built environment offered. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky. Above the town, the sky that had once opened onto light over the Bay of Naples was replaced by a churning canopy of eruption. Day lost its familiar direction. Land and sea were hidden behind suspended material. The world became local and immediate. A wall, a chamber, a hand, a breath. History often speaks in large terms, but catastrophes lived at close range, one narrowing instant after another. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky. Herculaneum's preservation owes much to the very force that destroyed it. Thick volcanic deposits later hardened, sealed structures and objects in unusual ways. Wood survived as charcoal. Upper stories, balconies, and household details endured where they might otherwise have vanished. Yet this preservation belongs to a tragic condition. The beauty later uncovered by archaeologists exists because Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky, the streets, once patterned by footsteps and trade, were muted beneath meters of material. Public and private space lost their distinction. A bath complex, a shop, a courtyard, a bedroom, all entered the same volcanic stillness. This leveling is part of the sadness of the site. The eruption did not care for rank or architecture. It moved through the town with the same indifferent power, folding every. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky, Roman towns were built for sociability. Voices carried through atriums. Neighbors passed one another in lanes. Business mixed easily with family life. To think of Herculaneum at the moment of eruption is to think of all that texture suddenly overwhelmed. The catastrophe did not only destroy walls and roofs, it extinguished the living rhythm between them, the sounds, expectations, and small recognition. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky, in the villa of the Papyri and in other fine residences, rooms intended for reflection and display were brought into the same darkness. Libraries, sculptures, colonnades, and gardens belonged to a world of cultivated leisure. The eruption gave no privilege to refinement. It crossed those spaces as it crossed workshops and storerooms. In that sense, Vesuvius was a brutal equalizer, reducing beauty in. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky, the bay itself was altered by the event. Material driven from the volcano and deposited across the coast changed the line between land and water. What had been waterfront in AD 79 no longer matched the later landscape. This matters because it reminds us that the eruption transformed not only buildings but setting. Herculaneum did not simply disappear under debris, it was removed from the. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky, the silence that followed was not immediate peace. It was the silence of completion after violence, when motion has ceased because there is no one left to move through it. Beneath the deposits, rooms held their forms and streets kept their lines, but function was gone. The town remained as shape without life. History had closed over Herculaneum, and for many centuries the closure would hold. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky. We often speak of buried cities as if they were sleeping, yet Herculaneum was not lulled into rest. It was overtaken. Even so, time gradually placed a quieter layer over the violence. Soil gathered, memory thinned, and later generations built above parts of the ancient town. The terrible morning of AD 79 receded from daily awareness, though beneath the ground its evidence remained compact, dark. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky. For the listener tonight, this chapter asks for a kind of witness rather than spectacle. We do not need to intensify the eruption to understand it. The facts are already immense. A mountain collapsing into surges, a coastal town engulfed, a community sealed away. Restraint lets the human truth remain visible. Herculaneum was a real place, inhabited by real people, overtaken in hours by forces measured in fire. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky. In archaeology, the town appears to us in fragments. A carbonized cradle, a timber beam, a painted wall, a cluster of victims by the shore. Each fragment speaks softly but clearly. Together they tell of abrupt interruption. There was no final chapter written by the inhabitants themselves, only material traces left where action ended. The mountain composed the last layer, and beneath it the town's unfinished. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky. If earlier chapters invited us to walk the streets of a living seaside community, this one asks us to feel the moment that walking became impossible. Ash thickened the air, heat crossed the harbor line, darkness erased distance. And then Herculaneum, with all its order and comfort, passed from present life into buried memory. Its houses did not crumble into legend. They entered preservation. Chapter 5. When Vesuvius broke the sky. By the end of the eruption's assault on Herculaneum, the town had become a sealed archive of loss. Streets, homes, bathhouses, workshops, and villas lay locked beneath volcanic stone and ash. The sky had broken, the shore had changed, and the elegant spaces of daily life had fallen still. From that stillness, centuries later, history would begin to speak again. But for now, the city rests in darkness. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. After the violence of Vesuvius, Herculaneum entered a silence deeper than sleep. Beneath layers of ash and hardened volcanic mud, streets, doorways, and courtyards disappeared from memory. The sea still breathed nearby, and above the buried town, generations lived on, scarcely aware that an entire Roman world rested below their feet, preserved in a darkness no lamp would disturb for nearly 2,000 years. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. In Pompeii, much was buried beneath falling ash, but at Herculaneum the volcanic flow arrived with greater force, sealing spaces with dense material that later cooled into rock-like layers. That terrible difference created a strange fate. Walls remained standing, beams endured, and in some rooms even shelves and doors survived, held in a stillness so complete it seemed time itself had been pressed flat underground. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. The town did not vanish all at once from every human mind. In the years after the eruption, survivors and neighbors must have remembered where villas had stood and where roads had once led toward the shore. Yet memory softens quickly. Children grew into adults, hearing only fragments, and those fragments became stories, then shadows, then almost nothing at all beneath the long patience of centuries. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. Rain fell, seasons turned, and the slopes around Vesuvius continued their quiet life above the dead town. Grass rooted itself, paths shifted, and new building rose where old streets had disappeared. The buried rooms below remained untouched by sunlight. There, painted walls kept their color in darkness, and household objects waited exactly where hands had set them down on a day that never properly ended. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. Burial is usually imagined as loss, and in many ways it was. Voices were cut off, names forgotten, routines broken beyond repair. Yet for Herculaneum, burial also meant shelter from weather, looting, and slow decay. The same force that destroyed the town wrapped parts of it in a severe protection, hiding fragile traces of daily life that open air would almost certainly have erased. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. Deep below the surface, wood did not burn away completely in every place. Under intense heat and sealed conditions, some timbers were carbonized and fixed into dark, delicate forms. Window frames, furniture, and structural beams remained where they had stood. It is one of Herculaneum's most haunting gifts to history. Not only stone and brick, but the outlines of ordinary materials usually lost first. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. The quiet underground held more than houses. In one great villa near the ancient shoreline, a library endured in the most improbable way. Papyrus scrolls, exposed to fierce heat, were carbonized rather than reduced entirely to ash. Blackened and tightly closed, they no longer looked like books at all. Still, inside those fragile cylinders, ancient writing waited in silence, unread yet not wholly gone. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. Imagine the stillness of those scrolls through the centuries. No hand reached to lift them from a shelf. No reader paused over a line of Greek philosophy. No lamp flickered beside them in the evening. The library remained in complete darkness while empires rose and fell above it. Rome changing, the Mediterranean shifting, languages evolving, all while these damaged texts stayed folded into their own hidden night. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. Herculaneum's burial was so deep and so firm that rediscovery came later and more slowly than in Pompeii. Hard volcanic layers covered the town like a locked loop. This difficulty helped preserve what was below, but it also kept the site remote from easy chance finds. For long ages, the town was not a ruin to visit, but a sealed absence beneath ordinary ground. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. Above the hidden streets, medieval and early modern communities made their own lives. Fields were worked, houses occupied, and local memories attached themselves to the visible world, not the invisible one below. The buried town did not announce itself. It gave no broken columns to catch the morning light, no open forum, no temple steps. Its history rested under pressure, patient and completely silent. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. There is something deeply moving in that patience. For nearly 2 millennia, cups, lamps, staircases, and wall paintings remained in a paused arrangement, as if waiting for the return of those who had left in fear. But no one returned. Instead, time gathered over them in layers. Dust became earth, earth became habit, and habit became a landscape that forgot what it was covering. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. Even the shoreline changed. In antiquity, Herculaneum stood close to the sea, enjoying breezes and bright coastal light. After the eruption, volcanic deposits altered the edge of the land, pushing the ancient waterfront away from the modern coast. The town that had once listened to waves found itself sealed inland, cut off from the sound that had shaped so much of its daily rhythm. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. The darkness below was not empty. It held rooms with their proportions intact, balconies collapsed into stillness, and corridors where no footsteps sounded. It held kitchens, storage jars, and traces of meals interrupted forever. It held the private geography of home. In that sense, Herculaneum was not merely buried architecture. It was preserved domestic life, enclosed whole within the aftermath of catastrophe. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. Historians often speak of preservation in careful technical terms, but here preservation feels almost poetic. The eruption arrested motion. It fixed a single Roman town at the boundary between life and oblivion. Centuries passed, but below ground the pause remained. That long suspension allows us much later to come nearer to ancient lives, not through legend alone, but through rooms left almost heartbreakingly. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. Yet preservation came at a price. Many things were crushed, charred, broken, or forever made unreadable to ordinary eyes. Human loss remained the foundation of every artifact that survived. To remember Herculaneum truthfully is to hold both realities together, the tenderness of what endured and the violence that caused it. The town's silence is gentle now, but it was born in overwhelming force. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. For a listener drifting towards sleep, this buried interval can seem almost dreamlike. Hundreds of years pass without a sound from below. Dynasties rise, faiths change, ships cross the sea, and still the town remains under its hardened cover. The silence becomes its own chapter of history. Not empty time, but waiting time, when the past is hidden yet somehow continues to exist. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. Somewhere in that darkness were mosaics no eye could see, thresholds no sandal crossed, and courtyards no rain could freshen. Air did not circulate through the sealed spaces as it once had. Day and night no longer mattered there. The town was removed from ordinary time. It belonged neither fully to the ancient world that created it, nor to the modern one that had not yet found it. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. The buried scrolls are perhaps the clearest symbol of this strange condition. Books are meant to be opened, handled, and read. These could be none of those things. They survived by becoming inaccessible. Their words remain present only as possibility, locked inside carbonized layers. In that paradox lies the heart of Herculaneum. What was saved by being hidden, and hidden almost beyond recovery. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. Across those long centuries, no one could know that the only surviving library from the Greco-Roman world rested beneath the earth at Herculaneum. Philosophical works, rolled and blackened, lay together in a silence no scholar could penetrate. Their continued existence was astonishing, but invisible. Knowledge itself had been buried, not destroyed outright, but placed beyond reach in a chamber time refused to open. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. This is why the chapter after destruction must be quiet. The drama has passed. What remains is endurance. mute, compressed, and deeply still. Herculaneum becomes a place of hidden continuance, where loss and memory settle together underground. Nothing moves, yet everything waits. The town is gone from the living world, but not gone entirely. Its absence is full, shaped, and resting just below forgetting. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. If we listen closely, this buried town teaches a slow lesson about time. History is not only battles, emperors, and sudden disasters. Sometimes history is what lies undisturbed afterward. Sometimes it is a sealed room, a charred beam, a closed scroll, kept safe and unreachable through ages that know nothing of it. Herculaneum survived not in memory alone, but in material silence. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. Beneath the weight of volcanic deposits, the town entered a kind of involuntary sleep. It was not peaceful in origin, yet over centuries it became peaceful in effect. The buried spaces rested untouched, protected from wind and weather, while the world above forgot their names. In that deep concealment, fragile details of Roman life endured, waiting for a later age patient enough to seek them out. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. And so Herculaneum remained below, century after century, a vanished seaside town held inside stone, ash, and darkness. Its library slept, its houses slept, its painted rooms and carbonized wood slept beside them. What had been catastrophe slowly became archive. What had been ending became preservation. In the next chapter, that long underground quiet will finally begin to break as the buried town is found again. Chapter 6. A town kept in darkness. For now, we leave Herculaneum where history left it for so long, sealed, silent, and astonishingly intact. Above, the world continues with all its noise and change. Below, the ancient town rests in perfect shadow, carrying its secrets through the centuries. It is a strange comfort to imagine it there, lost, preserved, and waiting patiently for human curiosity to return at last. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. In the early 18th century, workmen digging a well near the town of Resina broke through layers of hardened volcanic stone and met something no one expected, the ancient world below. Their tools struck marble, then open space. In the dimness of oil lamps, carved walls and scattered fragments appeared. Herculaneum did not return in a single revelation. It began with hesitant steps into darkness and wonder. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. In 1709, a farmer named Ambrogio Nocerino, often called Enzachetta, is said to have uncovered ancient remains while deepening a well. Beneath the earth lay part of a Roman theater, sealed for more than 16 centuries. News traveled quietly at first. What seemed a practical task became a doorway into buried time, and men with ropes, picks, and lamps descended to look more closely. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. These first encounters were not archaeological excavations in the modern sense. They were exploratory tunnels cut through packed, volcanic material under difficult and often dangerous conditions. Air was limited. Light was weak. The underground passages narrowed around the workers as they followed walls, statues, and stairways. Still, each newly found surface suggested a town preserved in an extraordinary... Chapter 7. The town returns to light. Herculaneum had been buried differently from nearby Pompeii. Instead of mostly loose ash, much of this town was sealed beneath dense volcanic flows that hardened over time into a stony mass. That made access harder, yet it also protected delicate interiors. Wood, furniture, and even structural elements survived where fire and pressure allowed them to endure. The buried town slept in darkness. Astonishingly intense. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. As interest grew, noble patrons and royal officials began to take notice of the discoveries below Resina. In the decades that followed, organized digging expanded under the Bourbon monarchy, especially during the reign of Charles of Bourbon, who became King of Naples in 1734. Curiosity, prestige, and the desire for ancient art all played a part. Herculaneum was becoming more than a rumor. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. Engineers and laborers worked by lamplight through narrow shafts and galleries, tracing the outlines of rooms they could not yet fully clear. A painted wall might appear first, then a doorway, then a bronze figure emerging from the earth. These finds came in fragments, each one disconnected at first from the whole. Yet slowly a pattern formed. What lay below was not a single monument, but an entire Roman. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. Among the earliest major structures to draw attention was the ancient theater. Its seating, passages, and decorative elements hinted at the civic life once lived here. Performances, gatherings, voices carried through stone. Visitors descended underground to see it, sometimes leaving their names scratched on the walls. Even in those early years, the buried theater stirred the imagination. It was a place both. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. The methods of the time often aimed less at understanding a site than at retrieving beautiful objects. Statues, inscriptions, columns, and decorative pieces could be removed and sent to collections. From a modern perspective, much context was lost. Even so, the discoveries at Herculaneum helped awaken Europe to the richness of the Roman past. Beneath ordinary ground, an ancient town was offering evidence. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. Imagine those underground moments. A worker raises a lamp, and color appears where only blackness was expected. Red, ochre, black, and white still cling to plaster walls. A border frames a painted panel. The air is still. Dust hangs in the glow. For an instant, the centuries seem folded together. The disaster that buried the room also shielded it, preserving a fragile brightness beneath the weight of earth and sea. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. Furniture and woodwork especially deepened the sense of astonishment. In many ancient sites, wood had long vanished, leaving only impressions or decay. At Herculaneum, however, carbonized pieces sometimes remained. Doors, beams, shelves, and household objects, altered by heat yet still recognizable. These survivals made the Roman world feel unexpectedly near. A room was no longer only walls and floor. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. Early visitors often described the strange experience of entering spaces no human eye had seen since antiquity. A staircase could descend into silence. A chamber could open with painted surfaces still surrounding it. The effect was intimate rather than grand. Herculaneum emerged not first as a ruined skyline under the sun, but as a sequence of enclosed encounters. Private rooms rediscovered one. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. In 1738, formal excavations also began at Pompeii, though for some time Herculaneum remained especially famous because of the richness of its finds. The two sites would come to shape understanding of Roman life in different ways. Pompeii spread outward in streets and open spaces. Herculaneum, harder to reach, offered preserved interiors and astonishing details. Together, they changed history. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. The hardened volcanic material that protected Herculaneum also forced excavators into selective searching. They followed promising signs rather than clearing broad areas. Because of that, the buried town was known in pieces long before it was understood as a complete urban landscape. A wall painting here, a corridor there, a statue elsewhere. Knowledge arrived like scattered lanterns in a cavern. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. Scholars, artists, and travelers across Europe became fascinated by the discoveries. Reports circulated. Drawings were made. Objects recovered from Herculaneum and nearby sites influenced taste, decoration, architecture, and ideas about antiquity. Yet the real power of the place was not only artistic, it was temporal. Here was evidence that a lost Roman town had not vanished into legend. It had endured in silence. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. There was also a practical challenge that shaped everything. Herculaneum lay under the modern settlement above it. Houses, streets, and daily life continued overhead, while explorers tunneled into the ancient layers below. Excavation could not simply spread outward without consequence. The town's return to light was therefore partial and careful, sometimes interrupted, sometimes redirected. Discover Chapter 7. The town returns to light. The feeling of these first rediscoveries was unlike the later image of archaeology in open trenches beneath the sky. Herculaneum came back through shafts, ladders, and rough passages. Men stooped through darkness carrying flame. Echoes moved along stone. Then, beyond a broken opening, there might be a painted room or sculpted niche untouched since AD 79. It must have felt less like excavation. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. Some finds were grand enough to command attention immediately. Bronzes of remarkable quality, marble statues, inscriptions naming people and places. Others were quieter, a threshold, a fragment of decoration, the shape of a domestic space. But those quieter things mattered deeply. They suggested ordinary life preserved alongside art. Herculaneum was not merely a storehouse of treasures. It was a town of Chapter 7. The town returns to light. It is important to remember that much of the interpretation came later. The earliest discoverers did not yet possess the full methods, records, or questions that archaeologists would develop over centuries. They knew they had found something ancient and extraordinary. They did not yet know how fully it could illuminate Roman life. The town returned first as marvel, and only gradually as evidence, context. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. Lamps were essential companions in this underworld. Their light was soft, limited and flickering, throwing movement across ancient surfaces. Relief carvings gained shifting shadows. Painted figures seemed to stir. A corridor could vanish into blackness beyond the flame. In that atmosphere, even careful observation must have carried a dreamlike quality. Herculaneum revealed itself slowly, almost reluctantly. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. The rediscovery of Herculaneum also changed the emotional meaning of Vesuvius. The volcano was not only a mountain associated with a famous ancient disaster, it had become a keeper of rooms, objects, and lives. Its destruction had preserved what time might otherwise have worn away. This paradox gave the site its peculiar stillness. Catastrophe had hidden the town and hidden it so completely that much of it. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. As the 18th century continued, Herculaneum remained a place of controlled access and growing fascination. Not everyone could descend into the tunnels, but accounts of what lay below spread widely. The buried town became part of Europe's historical imagination. People pictured underground chambers opening beneath ordinary streets, where ancient colors endured and Roman craftsmanship waited in silence. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. What emerged from Herculaneum in those years was not yet a complete map, nor a full understanding, but something perhaps more haunting. Glimpses. A room discovered and then left behind. A sculpture carried upward into daylight, a painted wall seen in lamplight before darkness returned. These moments gave the town a fragmentary presence in the world above. Herculaneum was resurfacing like memory itself, vivid. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. In these early rediscoveries, wonder and limitations always traveled together. The workers and patrons of the 18th century opened a door into antiquity, but only partway. They found enough to astonish Europe, yet much still lay inaccessible. Even so, the silence had been broken. After more than 1,600 years underground, Herculaneum had begun to speak again, not in one voice, but in fragments. Chapter 7. The town returns to light. And among those fragments, somewhere beyond the first tunnels and the first astonished reports, waited a discovery that would one day become legendary. A great seaside villa, and the only surviving library from the ancient Roman world. But that revelation had not yet fully arrived. For now, the town was only beginning to stir beneath the earth, returning to light in pieces, and teaching the living how to live. Chapter 8. The carbonized library. Deep beneath layers of hardened ash, excavators reached a villa unlike any other yet found at Herculaneum. Within its elegant rooms and long corridors, they began to uncover something almost beyond belief. A library from the ancient world. Not a statue, not a mosaic, but shelves once filled with thought itself. In that buried silence, the past seemed to wait with astonishing patience. Chapter 8. The carbonized library. This was the Villa of the Papyri, a grand seaside residence named for the treasure hidden inside it. As tunnels pushed farther through the volcanic debris in the 18th century, workers discovered hundreds of strange black cylinders. At first glance, they looked like lumps of charcoal or burned sticks. Yet scholars soon understood that these fragile shapes were papyrus scrolls, transformed by disaster. In Chapter 8, the carbonized library, their survival was almost miraculous. When Vesuvius erupted in AD 79, intense heat carbonized the scrolls before flames or decay could consume them entirely. They were left blackened, brittle, and tightly rolled, preserved in a state that was both ruin and rescue. What had once been ordinary writing materials became delicate relics of a vanished intellectual world, too damaged to open easily. Yet Chapter 8, the carbonized library. For historians, the discovery carried a weight difficult to overstate. No other library from the Greco-Roman world has survived in anything like this form. Elsewhere, ancient texts endured only because generations copied them by hand. Here, by contrast, were original scrolls from antiquity itself, lying where their owners had kept them. The villa offered not only words, but a glimpse into how learning once rested. Chapter 8, the carbonized library. There was excitement, of course, but also sorrow. Every scroll seemed to embody a narrow escape from oblivion, and each one reminded scholars of how much had still been lost. The ancient Mediterranean produced countless poems, histories, plays, and philosophical works that vanished over time. In these carbonized rolls, people could sense the edge of that absence, surviving fragments pressed close against an immeasurable. Chapter 8, the carbonized library. Early attempts to handle the papyri were cautious, but caution alone could not solve the central problem. The scrolls were fused by heat and age, their layers compressed into delicate spirals. To open them by force risked tearing them into useless fragments. Yet leaving them closed meant leaving their voices trapped. From the beginning, the library posed a painful question. How do you rescue a text with Chapter 8, the carbonized library? In the 18th century, specialists devised mechanical methods to unroll some of the papyri. These efforts achieved important results, though often at a heavy cost. Pieces could break away, outer layers might crumble, and sections of text were sometimes lost in the process. Even so, patient work revealed that many scrolls contained Greek writing, much of it linked to Epicurean philosophy. Bit by bit, Chapter 8, the carbonized library. The name most closely associated with many recovered texts is Philodemus, an Epicurean philosopher and poet of the 1st century BC. His works on ethics, music, rhetoric, and other subjects appear prominently among the open scrolls. This has led many scholars to think the library reflected a philosophical circle shaped by Epicurean learning. In those rooms by the sea, conversation may once have been. Chapter 8, the carbonized library. Some historians have connected the villa with Lucius Calpurnius Piso Caesoninus, the father-in-law of Julius Caesar, though the ownership remains unproven. The scale and richness of the residence suggest an elite household, one with the means to collect sculpture, commission fine architecture, and maintain a library of serious intellectual ambition. Whether Piso lived there or not, the collection. Chapter 8, the carbonized library. Imagine the shelves before the eruption, papyrus rolls arranged in wooden cases, labels attached, readers selecting a text for study or reflection. Perhaps a servant carried a scroll into a shaded portico. Perhaps a guest discussed philosophy while waves moved quietly beyond the villa grounds. The library was once part of ordinary life, not yet an archaeological wonder. That everyday intimacy makes it Chapter 8, the carbonized library. Yet what survived did so in a cruelly altered form. The scrolls were not preserved as neat documents waiting to be read. They were compressed, cracked, and darkened almost beyond recognition. To many early observers, they appeared hopelessly ruined. Their very preservation created a paradox. They endured because catastrophe transformed them, but that same transformation sealed their contents behind a nearly. Chapter 8, the carbonized library. Scholars who studied the open text discovered not dramatic epics or lost tragedies at first, but philosophical treatises, often dense and technical. Even this carried deep importance. Such works revealed intellectual habits, school traditions, and the texture of Roman engagement with Greek thought. The library reminded the modern world that ancient culture was not only monumental and heroic, it was also. Chapter 8. The carbonized library. The villa itself added to the wonder. Excavations uncovered magnificent bronzes and marbles, making clear that this was a place where art and ideas coexisted. The library did not stand apart from beauty. It belonged within an environment of cultivated taste. A person could move from sculpture to garden, from colonnade to scroll, inhabiting a world where intellectual life formed part of refined domestic experience. Chapter 8. The carbonized library. For generations, many scrolls remained unopened because available methods were too dangerous. The unopened rolls became symbols of possibility, almost legendary in the history of classical scholarship. Everyone knew they might contain works unknown to us, perhaps texts by philosophers, poets, or historians whose voices had otherwise disappeared. But hope had to live beside restraint. Because Chapter 8. The carbonized library. This balance between longing and patience shaped the modern story of the Papyri. Conservators, classicists, and imaging specialists each approached the scrolls with a kind of reverence. The task was no longer simply to possess ancient objects, but to listen without harming them. Technology gradually offered new paths, allowing scholars to look beneath the carbonized surface. What once seemed mute began, very slowly. Chapter 8. The carbonized library. Advances in imaging made it possible to scan still-rolled papyri in extraordinary detail. Researchers could map the internal folds and trace the winding paths of each layer without physically opening the scroll. This was painstaking work, combining archaeology, papyrology, computer science, and patient interpretation. The dream was simple to describe, yet immensely difficult to achieve. To read ink on page. Chapter 8. The carbonized library. One challenge was that the ink used on many Herculaneum scrolls was carbon-based, making it difficult to distinguish from the carbonized papyrus itself. The letters did not leap out brightly from the surface. They hid in subtle differences, faint signs waiting for methods sensitive enough to detect them. Reading these texts became an exercise in humility, a reminder that ancient knowledge sometimes survives only. Chapter 8. The carbonized library. In recent years, digital techniques transformed what scholars believed might be possible. High-resolution scans, machine learning, and virtual unwrapping methods began to work together in ways earlier generations could scarcely imagine. The unopened scroll was no longer only an emblem of frustration. It became a frontier. Each technical gain carried emotional force as well. Because behind every improved. Chapter 8. The carbonized library. The broader meaning of the library reaches beyond its specific texts. It stands as evidence that entire realms of ancient thought once circulated in material forms now mostly destroyed. Wooden shelves burned, inks faded, papyrus rotted, and generations passed. Herculaneum interrupts that pattern for a brief, precious moment. It offers proof not only of what survives, but of what was once possible. Chapter 8. The carbonized library. There is something deeply moving in the image of these scrolls resting through the centuries, sealed in darkness while empires rose and fell above them. Their authors never imagined such a fate. Their readers never guessed that disaster would turn study materials into archaeological mysteries. And yet the scrolls remained. They waited through long silence, carrying arguments, reflections, and careful. Chapter 8. The carbonized library. When modern scholars speak of the villa of the Papyri, their language often blends precision with wonder. Measurements, provenances, and textual identifications matter greatly, yet none of that fully captures the feeling of the find. This is the only surviving library from the Greco-Roman world. That fact alone changes the emotional register of every fragment. Each scrap is not merely evidence. It is. Chapter 8. The carbonized library. the melancholy remains impossible to ignore. Even in success, the library teaches loss. Some scrolls are too damaged to recover fully. Some texts survive only in portions. Others may never be read at all. The collection opens a door into antiquity, but not all the way. Through that narrow gap, we glimpse brilliance and incompletion together, enough to inspire gratitude, enough to sharpen our sense of what vanished. Chapter 8. The Carbonized Library. And still, the story does not end in grief. Every improvement in reading these papyri enlarges the conversation between past and present. It shows that preservation can take unfamiliar forms, and that knowledge thought inaccessible may yet be approached with care. The Carbonized Library asks for patience rather than conquest. It invites us to read slowly, respectfully, and with wonder, as though listening at Chapter 8, The Carbonized Library. In the buried villa at Herculaneum, hundreds of blackened scrolls endured where nearly all other ancient libraries disappeared. They survived not in beauty, but in damaged persistence. That is what makes them so effective. They are fragile remains of human thought, nearly lost forever, and yet still present, still capable of speaking. In their silence, scholars heard possibility, and in their survival, the ancient Chapter 9, reading what fire refused to erase. In the modern era, the rolled papyri entered a quieter kind of excavation, not from earth, but from secrecy. Scholars no longer faced only ash, pressure, and age. They faced the delicate problem of how to read what could not safely be opened. Each scroll, blackened by Vesuvius, held words somewhere inside, but touch itself could destroy them. So patience became the first tool once more. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. For generations, the Herculaneum scrolls had seemed to resist every hopeful hand. Earlier efforts to unroll them physically had sometimes revealed precious writing, yet they could also tear the papyrus into fragments. The surviving rolls were fragile beyond ordinary comparison, compressed, carbonized, and warped by intense heat. To read them without harming them required a method almost paradoxical. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. That challenge drew historians, conservators, papyrologists, computer scientists, and imaging specialists into the same long conversation. The scrolls were ancient texts, yes, but they had also become complex physical puzzles. Their layers were folded tightly together like dark leaves after a storm. Ink lay against papyrus in patterns too faint for the eye alone. Every success depended on Chapter 9, reading what fire refused to erase. One important step came through high-resolution scanning, especially X-ray methods able to peer inside an object without cutting it apart. These scans did not magically reveal readable sentences at once. Instead, they produced intricate data, cross-sections, densities, folds, and surfaces hidden within the roll. What had once been a sealed cylinder of carbon slowly became a navigable landscape. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. Yet seeing the interior structure was only part of the problem. Ancient ink on Herculaneum papyri can be extremely difficult to distinguish from the carbonized writing surface beneath it. Both may appear dark, both may seem nearly fused by disaster. Researchers had to search for minute differences, tiny signals left in texture, chemistry, or topography. The writing was there, but it did not off. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. This is where digital reconstruction began to feel almost like a second archaeology. Software could help trace curved layers within a rolled scroll, separating one thin sheet from another in virtual space. The process is often called digital unwrapping or virtual unrolling. No fingers tugged at the papyrus, no blade slipped between layers. Instead, mathematics and imaging worked together. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. Even after a layer was digitally flattened, another task remained, identifying letters. Ancient Greek handwriting is subtle under the best conditions, and these were not the best conditions. Creases, shadows, compression, and damaged surfaces complicated every line. Researchers trained systems to recognize probable ink traces, while experts compared shapes, contexts, and recurring forms. Chapter 9. reading what fire refused to erase. In this way, the modern study of the scrolls became neither purely technological nor purely traditional. It was a partnership across centuries of method. The scholar who knew ancient philosophical language needed the engineer who understood imaging data. The programmer developing pattern recognition needed the papyrologist who could notice a plausible letter group. Progress arrived. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. Public interest grew as these efforts became more widely known, especially through projects that invited collaboration beyond a single museum or university. Among the most famous was the Vesuvius Challenge, which encouraged teams around the world to work on reading the unopened scrolls through machine learning and advanced scans. It was a modern kind of scholarly summons, open, ambitious. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. The challenge focused attention on a remarkable truth. These rolls were not simply artifacts, but books still waiting to be read. For centuries they had been admired as survivors, symbols, mysteries. Now they were increasingly treated as texts in suspense. Somewhere within them were arguments, observations, and expressions shaped by ancient minds. To recover even a few lines would not merely. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. Reports in the 2020s showed that meaningful progress was possible. Small sections of text began to emerge from digitally processed scans, confirming that hidden writing could indeed be detected inside unopened rolls. This did not mean the work was suddenly easy. Every gain rested on thousands of decisions, tests, and revisions. But a threshold had been crossed. The dream of reading. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. Then came the breakthrough reported in 2026, associated with the Vesuvius Challenge. The first full digital unwrapping and reading of a still-rolled Herculaneum papyrus. After centuries in which unopened scrolls had kept their contents hidden, one had finally yielded its text without being physically opened. The achievement felt technical, certainly, but also deeply human. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. To understand the quiet grandeur of that moment, it helps to remember what had happened in AD 79. Fire, heat, pressure, darkness, and time had transformed the library into a set of brittle black forms. Many generations could preserve them, catalog them, and wonder over them, yet not read them fully. In 2026, one of those sealed witnesses spoke again. Not loudly, not dramatically. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. The reading of a still-rolled papyrus does not mean every mystery is solved. Many scrolls remain unopened, undeciphered, or only partly understood. The data can be difficult. Interpretation still requires care. Scholars must verify, compare, and sometimes disagree. But that is the proper rhythm of history. Not a single triumphant shout, but a widening circle of understanding. One success. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. There is something especially moving in the idea of reading without unrolling. Earlier ages often had to choose between access and preservation. To know the contents of a scroll, one might risk harming the object itself. Modern imaging has begun to soften that old bargain. The scroll can remain closed, and yet its interior can open. In that balance between restraint and discovery, the ethics. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. The Herculaneum Library has always invited imagination. What authors are still there, what schools of thought, what overlooked passages, what ordinary scribal habits preserved by catastrophe. With digital methods improving, such questions feel less remote than before. The unopened rolls are no longer only symbols of loss, they are also reservoirs of possibility. Each one may contain a voice. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. For historians of philosophy and literature, the implications are profound. New texts from Herculaneum might clarify known works, preserve unknown ones, or deepen our understanding of intellectual life in the late Roman Republic and early Empire. Even modest fragments can matter greatly. A title, a line of argument, a name, a citation. Libraries are built from such details. So too is the map. Chapter 9. reading what fire refused to erase. For the rest of us, the meaning may be simpler and just as powerful. A book that seemed permanently unreachable was reached. A human hand once wrote on papyrus near the Bay of Naples, never imagining scanners, algorithms, or digital models. Yet across 20 centuries, strangers continued the attempt to listen. Their tools changed completely, but the impulse did not. Curiosity remained loyal. Chapter 9. Reading what fire refused to erase. It is tempting to describe such achievements as miracles of technology, but the word patience may be more accurate. Instruments had to be built or adapted, scans had to be processed, models had to be corrected, claims had to be checked, specialists had to trust one another's skills. The final result rested on years of quiet labor, rarely visible from the outside. Discovery, in this case, was Chapter 9, reading what fire refused to erase. The story also reminds us that preservation is not a finished act completed in the museum storeroom. Preservation can continue through interpretation. An object survives physically, then later survives intellectually as its meaning becomes available again. The Herculaneum scrolls endured the volcano, the centuries, and the hazards of excavation. Now some may endure in another way, by re-entering Chapter 9, reading what fire refused to erase. In a sense, the modern researchers became careful companions to the ancient owners of the library. They approached the scrolls not as conquerors of a puzzle, but as stewards of a difficult inheritance. The task demanded humility because the material was fragile, and humility because the past does not always reveal itself on command. To wait, to measure, to test, to read slowly. These are formed. Chapter 9, reading what fire refused to erase. And so the chapter closes, not with smoke or collapse, but with a screen softly lit in a modern room. Layered data resolving into surfaces, surfaces into marks, marks into letters, and letters into language. The ancient library remains partly hidden, yes, but no longer unreachable. Something that was sealed has begun to open in another dimension. The burned scroll, without unfolding, has offered. Chapter 9, reading what fire refused to erase. If Herculaneum once showed how swiftly a world can vanish, the rediscovered text shows how slowly it can return. Not all at once, not intact, but enough to remind us that loss is sometimes incomplete. Beneath ash, beneath carbon, beneath centuries of stillness, sentences waited. The people who sought them did not defeat time. They collaborated with it, listening for what remained and learning how to hear it. Chapter 9, reading what fire refused to erase. In the end, the first full digital reading of a still-rolled Herculaneum papyrus stands as a calm victory, not over nature, but over despair. It tells us that even after destruction, knowledge can persist in hidden forms, awaiting the right combination of care and imagination. The silent library has not finished speaking. It has only begun, very softly, to turn one more page in the dark. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. As this story nears its quiet end, we return to Herculaneum with gentler eyes. The town by the sea no longer feels only lost. It feels patient, almost watchful, as if stone streets, darkened walls, and sealed rooms have been holding their breath across the centuries, waiting for careful hands and listening minds. In that stillness, the buried library seems less silent now, and more like a voice slowly returning. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. Nearly 2,000 years passed between the eruption of AD 79 and the first moments when hidden words began to emerge again from the rolled papyri. That long silence can feel difficult to imagine. Generations were born and gone. Empires rose, altered, and disappeared. Yet within carbonized scrolls, touched by volcanic heat and sealed by time, traces of thought remain, waiting through. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. There is something moving in the idea that a library could survive without being readable. For centuries, these scrolls were known as objects before they were known as voices. They sat as fragile reminders of a vanished world, important and mysterious, but closed. To look at them was to stand at the edge of understanding. To read them again, even partly, is to cross a threshold of history kept shut. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. Libraries are often imagined as places of motion held in quiet form. Shelves stand still, but minds travel. In Herculaneum, that familiar stillness became something deeper. Heat blackened the papyrus, ash sealed the rooms, and the ordinary work of reading came to an end. But the purpose of a library did not entirely vanish. It remained, hidden inside matter itself, until tools of another age. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. The recent digital unwrapping of a still-rolled Herculaneum papyrus did not simply reveal text. It changed the emotional shape of the story. The library was no longer only a symbol of what had been lost. It became evidence that loss was not complete. Even after unimaginable delay, meaning could return. Letters could surface from compressed layers. Human thought, once interrupted by disaster. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. That is perhaps why this discovery feels so calm as well as remarkable. It does not shout. It does not overturn the ancient world in a single dramatic flash. Instead, it offers something smaller and steadier. A few recovered words. A new method proven possible. A door opened slightly where all had seemed closed. For a sleep story, it is fitting that the miracle here arrives softly, by patience. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. We may never recover every scroll, every shelf, or every sentence once kept in the villa of the Papyri. Some things were burned beyond retrieval. Some remain hidden. Some may always resist us. Yet history is not only built from complete answers. It is also shaped by fragments, by careful reading, and by the humility to treasure what survives. In Herculaneum, even a partial voice can feel wonderfully. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. Think for a moment of the people who once lived among these rooms. Readers, writers, servants, visitors, owners, guests. Sandals moving over polished floors. Sea air entering shaded spaces. Conversation drifting past shelves where scrolls rested in orderly rows. None of them could have imagined that their library would become a puzzle for distant centuries. And yet some trace of their attention. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. Herculaneum itself also asked to be remembered not only through eruption, but through routine. It was a place of baths, courtyards, workshops, household shrines, and meals. Children would have learned familiar paths through its streets. Neighbors would have recognized one another by voice and step. Before it became a site of study, it was a town of lived time. That simple truth gives warmth. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. When archaeology uncovers a town like this, it does more than expose ruins. It reintroduces pace. A bench suggests waiting, a kitchen suggests preparation, a doorway suggests arrival and departure. In Herculaneum, preservation can feel intimate enough to slow the imagination into ordinary moments. The library belongs within that texture of life. It was not an abstract treasure. It stood in. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. There is comfort in knowing that rediscovery did not happen all at once. Tunnels, notes, guesses, setbacks, technologies, and revised interpretations formed a long chain across centuries. Many minds contributed, often without seeing the final result. That, too, was part of the story. Knowledge is communal and cumulative. The ancient readers of the scrolls are gone, but modern readers approach the. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. The sea remains near in our imagination as this chapter settles. You can picture evening light over the Bay of Naples, softened now by distance and memory. The mountain still rises beyond it, familiar and immense. Between water and volcano stood Herculaneum, once elegant and busy, later buried and hushed. Today it exists in another state again, not fully alive, not fully absent, but suspended between. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. The phrase silent library once carried a heavy finality. It suggested words trapped forever, thought cut off, understanding denied. Now the phrase shifts. The library was silent, yes, but not beyond all hope. Its silence was long rather than absolute. That distinction matters. It reminds us that the past can exceed our assumptions. What appears closed may still contain a future meeting between old knowledge. Chapter 10. the library speaks softly again. In a deeper sense, the speaking library is not only about text, it is about relationship. Human beings leave traces, and later human beings learn how to receive them. Across the centuries, curiosity meets endurance, craft meets accident, disaster meets preservation. The result is neither simple triumph nor pure mourning. It is a quieter balance. We grieve what vanished, while giving thanks. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. Perhaps that is why Herculaneum feels restful at the end of this journey. Its tragedy is real and should not be softened away. Yet the town is also a place where memory endured in material form. Walls held their shape, wood survived in carbonized form. Scrolls remained, though altered almost beyond recognition. Out of destruction came an archive unlike any other, and from that archive comes a renewal. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. If we listen closely, what returns from Herculaneum is not noise, but texture, a softened rhythm of Roman life, a room arranged for thought, a household paused in history, a library becoming legible by degrees. These are not thunderous revelations, they are gentle recognitions. They invite us to notice how much meaning can live in small survivals, a contour, a threshold, a faint line of ink. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. The people who built, read, stored, and cared for these scrolls belong to a world that could never imagine digital imaging or computational analysis. Yet those modern methods have become unexpected companions to ancient hands. There is something beautiful in that meeting. Technology here does not pull us away from the human past. It moves us nearer, helping us approach damaged artifacts with more care. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. So the story closes where it began, with a town by the sea, under the shadow of Vesuvius. But the feeling has changed. At first we approached Herculaneum as a place about to vanish. Now we leave it as a place still speaking. Not loudly, not completely, but enough to remind us that buried memory is not always gone. Sometimes it rests, hidden for a very long time, until patience learns how to call it back. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. It is easy to think of history as a record of endings. Cities fall, voices fade, manuscripts burn, names disappear. Yet Herculaneum offers another pattern as well. Some endings become intervals, some silences become pauses, some losses, while never repaired, are partly answered by return. This does not undo the past, it simply widens it. It allows room for rediscovery, and for the tender surprise of hearing. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. As you rest with this final chapter, imagine the villa in stillness, columns standing in dim light, rooms cool after the day, scrolls once shelved in order then sealed by catastrophe, now yielding their hidden patterns to careful study. The image carries sorrow, but not only sorrow, it also carries endurance. Across centuries, the ancient desire to preserve thought has reached toward us, and we in Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. Herculaneum remains one of the most intimate archaeological places in the Roman world because it allows us to sense scale so clearly. Not the scale of empire, but the scale of rooms, footsteps, meals, books, and evening routines. The library belongs to that human measure. Its recovery matters not only because it is rare, but because it brings us close to private acts of reading and reflection, once woven. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. In the calm light of ending, the town seems to hold together many truths at once. It is a site of disaster, a site of preservation, a place of scholarly effort, a place of ordinary memory, a place where ancient life was interrupted and where modern care continues the conversation. That layered identity may be the most faithful way to remember Herculaneum, not as one thing alone, but as many times. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. If sleep is near now, let the last image be a peaceful one. The shoreline quiet under evening sky, the mountain distant and still. Beneath layers of earth once hardened by fire, a library no longer entirely closed. Somewhere within those darkened folds, language has begun to reappear. Not rushed, not forced, but patiently welcomed back. It is a gentle ending, that what was hidden so long can once again be. Chapter 10. The library speaks softly again. And so we leave Herculaneum in enduring light, not forgetting the ash, the heat, or the suddenness of AD 79, but also not forgetting the calm that followed centuries later when rediscovery began its patient work. Here, daily life, buried memory, and careful understanding meet. A town once silenced now offers quiet speech again, and by the sea, in the imagination, it rests, no longer lost, but